The Japanese thought it would be easy. Show up with 4 carriers, wipe out what's left of the American fleet, and go home. A few days, maybe a week tops. Instead, they sailed straight into the worst 4 days of their lives. June 1942. Japan's most powerful fleet headed to Midway, thinking they had the perfect surprise attack planned. But someone forgot to tell them the Americans already knew they were coming. Look, spring 1942, and Japan looked unstoppable. Like, genuinely unstoppable. Their carriers had hit Pearl Harbor 6 months earlier and sent the U.S. Navy scrambling into full retreat. Now Admiral Yamamoto had this plan. What he thought was the finishing blow. Lure out America's remaining carriers, ambush them near Midway Atoll, destroy them in one clean strike. After that, seize Midway as a forward base and force the Americans to the negotiating table. The plan was elegant, you know, multi-layered. They'd run a fake attack up in the Aleutians to split American attention, while the main force hit Midway. 4 fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu, backed by battleships, cruisers, the works. Over 200 aircraft. Honestly, it was the most powerful naval strike force ever put together. And Japanese commanders were confident. Why wouldn't they be? They'd been steamrolling through the Pacific for 6 months straight. Wake Island, Philippines, Singapore, nothing stopped them. The Americans were on their heels, defensive, outgunned. This was supposed to be the knockout punch. But here's the thing about overconfidence. It makes you sloppy, and while Yamamoto's fleet was steaming toward Midway, assuming total secrecy, a small team of exhausted cryptanalysts sitting in a basement at Pearl Harbor had been reading their mail for weeks. Station Hypo. That's what they called it. A cramped, sweltering dungeon underneath the 14th Naval District headquarters. Lieutenant Commander Joseph Rochefort ran it. Brilliant guy, obsessive, usually wearing a bathrobe because the basement was freezing, and he basically lived there. His team had been grinding through fragments of Japanese naval codes since before Pearl Harbor. Partial breaks, educated guesses, maddening puzzle pieces that didn't quite fit. By late May 1942, they'd intercepted enough to know something big was coming. The Japanese kept mentioning this target called AF. But where the hell was AF? Rochefort was convinced it was Midway. Other intel guys in Washington disagreed. Maybe Hawaii, maybe the Aleutians. Nobody knew for sure. So Rochefort did something brilliant. He had Midway send an uncoded radio message saying they were running low on fresh water. Just broadcasted it in the clear. A fake emergency. And within 48 hours, Japanese intelligence intercepted it and sent their own coded message. AF is short on water. Gotcha. That one gamble convinced Admiral Nimitz. AF was Midway. The Japanese were coming. And now the Americans knew exactly when and where. Think about that for a second. One creative bluff turned intelligence into action. Nimitz moved fast. He positioned 3 carriers, Enterprise, Hornet, and Yorktown, which had been hastily patched up from previous damage, northeast of Midway, right where the Japanese wouldn't expect them. Yamamoto thought he was setting an ambush. Instead, he was sailing straight into one. The chessboard was set. Intelligence had become positioning. The underdog had the advantage, but they still had to execute. And execution. That's where it gets brutal. Morning of June 4th, 1942. The Japanese strike force launched their first wave against Midway Island itself. American planes scrambled from the atoll, slow, outdated fighters and bombers, and got absolutely shredded. The Japanese pilots radioed back minimal damage and recommended a second strike. That's when American torpedo bombers from the carriers showed up. Torpedo Squadron 8 from the Hornet came in first. 15 planes. Flying these slow, lumbering TBD devastators, obsolete by 1942 standards, honestly. No fighter escort. They flew low and straight toward the Japanese carriers through this wall of anti-aircraft fire and swarming Zeros. It was a massacre. 14 of 15 planes shot down. Almost no one survived. Then Torpedo Squadron 6 from Enterprise. Same result, most of them dead. Then Torpedo Squadron 3 from Yorktown. Wiped out. 3 entire squadrons. Gone. But here's what those pilots did without even knowing it. They pulled every Japanese fighter down to wave-top level. The Zeros were so focused on slaughtering the torpedo bombers that nobody was watching the sky above them. Nobody. And at that exact moment, high above, Wade McCluskey's dive bombers arrived. Lieutenant Commander McCluskey had been searching for hours. He'd launched from Enterprise, flown to where the Japanese carriers were supposed to be, and found nothing. Empty ocean. Fuel running low. His squadron was minutes from having to turn back. Some pilots were already suggesting abort. Then McCluskey spotted something. A tiny wake. A single Japanese destroyer racing northeast at full speed, leaving this white trail across the blue Pacific. He made a call. Follow it. That destroyer was rushing to rejoin the main fleet, and it led him straight to the carriers. What McCluskey saw when he got there was a target so perfect it shouldn't have existed. All 4 Japanese carriers were in the middle of recovering aircraft. Flight decks absolutely packed with planes being refueled and rearmed, aviation fuel hoses running everywhere, bombs and torpedoes just sitting on deck. See, the carriers had just been ordered to switch their loadout from land attack bombs to anti-ship torpedoes after reports of American carriers nearby. It was chaos, vulnerability, a lit fuse waiting for a match. McCluskey's dauntless dive bombers rolled into their attack from 14,000 feet. The first bomb hit Akagi, Yamamoto's flagship, and detonated the armed and fueled aircraft sitting on deck. The explosion ripped through the hangar below. Within minutes, the entire ship was an inferno. Kaga took multiple hits. Same result. Fires, secondary explosions, uncontrollable chaos spreading across the deck. Soryu got hit moments later by dive bombers from Yorktown. 3 fleet carriers burning in the span of 5 minutes. 5 minutes. The 4th carrier, Hiryu, managed to launch a counterstrike. Her planes found Yorktown and crippled her with bombs and torpedoes. But later that afternoon, American dive bombers found Hiryu too and left her burning. By dawn on June 5th, all 4 Japanese carriers were gone. Akagi scuttled by Japanese destroyers. Kaga sunk. Soryu sunk. Hiryu sunk after that final counterstrike. With them went over 3,000 men and more than 200 aircraft. But here's the loss that really mattered. Japan's elite carrier pilots. The guys who'd trained for years. The veterans who'd hit Pearl Harbor, who'd struck across the Pacific. They were irreplaceable. You can build new carriers in a year or 2 if you've got the industrial base, but you can't build experienced pilots. That takes time you don't have in the middle of a war. The Americans lost Yorktown and a lot of brave airmen. But the strategic balance? It had flipped. Let me give you the numbers because they tell the story. 4 Japanese fleet carriers sunk. 1 American carrier lost. Japan lost roughly 3,000 men and over 200 aircraft. America lost around 300 men and 150 aircraft. But raw numbers don't capture the emotional gut punch. Japan's offensive capacity in the Pacific just stopped. They could still fight, sure, but their ability to project carrier power deep into the Central Pacific was broken. And look, Midway wasn't destiny or fate or some predetermined outcome. It was a chain of human decisions under pressure, a codebreaker's hunch, a commander's faith in intelligence most people doubted, torpedo pilots attacking against impossible odds, 1 scout pilot following a hunch about a destroyer's wake, dive bombers arriving at the exact moment when the enemy was most vulnerable. That's not destiny. That's preparation, meeting opportunity. With a lot of courage and a bit of luck, mixed in. The aftermath was immediate and brutal for Japan. With 4 carriers lost and veteran crews gone, their offensive operations stalled. They could defend. They could dig in. But the initiative was gone. The U.S. went from defending the Pacific to planning offensives. Midway bought time and momentum. It rewrote the entire timetable of the war. Historians call it the turning point, and honestly, they're right. There are quieter legacies, too. Station Hypo's success reshaped how intelligence mattered in modern warfare. Signals intelligence became critical, not just nice to have. Carrier aviation proved it was the new king of naval warfare. Battleships? They were done as the decisive force. And the story of those torpedo squadrons, the sacrifice that bought time for the dive bombers, reminds you that wars turn on small acts of courage that nobody planned for. So if you're telling this story, here's the shape of it. Start with Japanese arrogance. Show the quiet work in that basement, Rochefort and his team grinding through codes. Put us in the cockpits as those torpedo planes fly into hell. Let your audience hold their breath while McCluskey keeps searching, fuel gauge dropping. Then the reveal. Dive bombers arrive at the perfect moment. Show the shock, the burning carriers, the impossible reversal. Step back and show what it meant. Lost pilots, lost carriers, the strategic flip. Close with reflection. Wars turn on human choices as much as grand strategy. Midway wasn't inevitable. It was preparation, courage, and a codebreaker's gamble compressing on a single point in time. The empire that seemed unstoppable hit a wall made of human will, and the Pacific would never look the same.